All right, so we want to go and just talk a little bit about some of this stuff first. And chapter 12 is about instructions created to simplify certain things in the factory. Simplify things in the factory. And that basically is all that I have in chapter 12, except that I also talk about tracking. Chapter 13 talks about matrices, arrays, and ways of using them, and the evolution of how they have been treated in the past, and different ways you can use them. In other words, there are a lot of ways you can use these, and one of them is in a batching system. Batching systems. And we have, in the batching system world, one of the nicest, it's 88. It's SP 88. It's a specification from Instrument Society of America, or ISA. SP 88. It has all the parts and pieces you would ever want to be able to design a batching system. So if you are programming certain processes, if you get to the point where you want to know how to program it from scratch and you don't have a clue, you might find, especially with ISA, a specification, okay? Now, not all specifications are created equal. They have specifications that are totally worthless, some of them that you might use a little bit of, but this one you can take to the bank. This one takes everything into account, and it nails it to the wall. In other words, if you have a batch house, you say, what is a batch house? You know, anybody have any idea what's a batch house? If I say the word batch house, do you have any idea what a batch house is? It's where you batch stuff, right? You can batch pancake mix. Usually you don't use a big system for that. You use a big batch house for things that are like gravel or sand or something like that you're using for making glass, for instance. Glass uses batch houses. Other systems use batch houses as well. But if you're building a batch of something, these guys nail it. And honest to goodness, I looked at that and I said, you know, that was after I had written all these batching programs that I had written. I said, somebody really very, 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 very wise sit down and explained everything, how to ask, the right questions to ask, all the right things to do, and they nailed it. So again, I want you to understand that not everybody gives all their information away, but in this situation, they do, in spades, okay? Did anybody, if I said in clubs, would anybody get upset if I said in spades, bat, or, you know, anyway. So anyway, for you bridge players, that's chapters 12 and 13. And I'm going to go through hopefully about 3 or 4 different things that you can use matrices for to give you some ideas of the power of using matrices in applications. So again, I want you to understand that this is a big, 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 big subject in and of itself. You could spend a whole 9 weeks, 12 weeks, you pick the amount of time just talking about this one subject. It's a big subject. Okay, so that's kind of that. Now let's go back and go with chapter. Okay, so I call this handling of data, but it really is just, like I said, it just has all these old instructions in it that, anyway. And I use this as an excuse to go through and explain some of the instruction that we have in the program controller, but these are the setup instructions. These are not the ones I really want to talk about. These are the ones that, okay, by the way, you have to know all this other stuff about PLCs. So here's some of them. You have the ability to do anding and oring of bits and bytes, and also longer words. And that's because you have the same capabilities in a PLC as you do in a computer. You have the shift instructions, and we will use the shift instructions in the tracking application. So we'll use that in that application. So here I go through and I talk to you about ands and ors of 16-bit, 32-bit long words. And you can do that. And you can do these other examples as well. I'm not going to try to get into all of them. This is Siemens. They do a decode and an encode. I don't know what those do, and I don't really care. If you need to know where they are and what they are, you may go back and look at them. I'm not going to try to get you to, like, oh, this is the greatest instruction ever. It may be something that you want, but now we get down to the color stuff. There are some interesting ones here, and I wanted to show you these. So this is, again, things you would have in a microprocessor that you're bringing over. But here is one that is not a Siemens one. This is only Allen Bradley. It's called the FIFO load, FIFO unload. And I've got some pictures with this, okay? So here is a system. This would be like down at the Pepsi plant. You would make a big mix of something, and then you would put it into what we call a day tank. Now, I've never been in the Pepsi plant, but I can almost predict that they have day tanks. Okay, what is a day tank? It's a day's worth of material, right? It's basically, that's what they call it. Whether or not that would be the exact thing that they would call it, but that's what most people call a day tank. It's what would hold a day's worth, or most of a day's worth of a run. Now, what's not shown here are your canning lines, or whatever you're going to do at downstream. Bottling lines, canning lines, whatever you're making downstream would come off of this and would go from there on down. So what happens? Well, you have a low switch and you have a high switch on each one of these. So when it hits the low switch, what do? Dial me another one, make me another mix, okay? So, you're down at the Pepsi plant, you have Pepsi, you have Diet Pepsi, you've got Mountain Dew, you name it, Dr. Pibb or whatever. I don't know what all they make down there, but anyway, whatever it is, you'd say, make me another batch. Make me a yellow batch, make me an orange batch, make me a whatever that color is batch, make me a red batch, okay? That's what that is. So hit a low and it starts making another batch. Now, if there is already something in that mix tank, what do? You queue up. You queue into what we call a FIFO stack, all right? Now that stack is dynamic in that as soon as the one empties, it goes onto the stack. But then the next thing that happens is, oh, by the way, this guy's sitting there waiting for something to go onto the stack. When that goes onto the stack, he says, I'm not doing anything. You want to come over here and I'll make this for you. So that pops it off the stack, and you're making that ingredient. That's what this is. So this is low. Now you pop it off the stack and you're making another one, okay? Now in the meantime, more of them come low. In other words, 2 of them come low. And when those hit, they hit in the order that they actually went low at. So in other words, you queue up just like you would in a grocery store. That's what a FIFO instruction does. If you were to write that instruction, write all those instructions without the FIFO instruction, it would take you quite a while. So they give you these specialty instructions just for this application. This is a queuing application. Okay, FIFO load, FIFO unload. And if you ever get into that situation, that's what you would do. Now, Siemens does not have this instruction, but they have a lot of specialty instructions that you can download. Like I said, when I was at Germany, they said they had 3,000 to 4,000 special library instructions. It'd be happy hunting. Try to find one I know that you would like, but on the other hand, if you can read German, but on the other hand, they probably got one, but I just don't know what it is. So a friendly call to your Siemens guy, and he will tell you probably more than likely what is going on there. But anyway, now you're doing, does everybody understand this idea of like in a grocery store? That's exactly what this is. That's all this is. And it's a specialty instruction invented because we did not have an instruction that did this well. Okay? There was no pop and push on a stack instruction, so we had to do something. So what we did was they came up with this FIFO load and FIFO one load instruction, and it does that for you. Now, an aside about simulation, I think I've talked to you already a little bit about simulation in a process environment. I think I've already mentioned this to you, so I'm going to skip this now. One of the best simulation packages is called Arena, A-R-E-N-A, and you get it for the price of Rockwell software. You get it with your, it's there. So a process simulation package that you could use is already in your system package that you have sitting on your desktop if you're programming Rockwell. It's there, called Arena. It may not be loaded because the guy didn't know what it was, but it's there and you can load it and you can use it. So Arena is a good software package for process control simulation. Okay? You don't have to take a course in process control simulation to use Arena. You don't have to be an expert at it, but it does most of that for you. It does the helps for you. But I have not used it myself, but I have seen it in use. And people that use it, like I said before, it may pay great dividends for you as a user. So and all this about being a mechanical engineer, being a controls engineer, you have to also think a little bit like an industrial engineer, and this is one of those times when you have to think like, maybe I should do some simulation of this to see if it's going to work. Am I going to get the throughput that I think I'm going to get? If I promised X number of pieces per hour, am I actually going to get that? You have to ask this question. Okay, here's another one. Now this one is a instruction that I kind of disagree with the use of because I wrote it a different way. But now this is being done a lot in tracking of product, and it basically follows a shifting of the bits in what we call a shift register. Now this is just nothing more than 32-bit words lined up next to each other, an array of words, if you will. But basically what you're doing is you're shifting as the product moves down the line, you sense movement, and every time you sense so much movement, an inch or 2 inches or 5 inches of movement, you move the bits by 1. Okay? So basically, if you look at these bits in the display on your computer, you're actually seeing this little dance of these ones going down this. And you actually see the movement of the ones in the array, which is an exact representation of the product going down the line. Very graphic implementation of tracking. What's good about this? It's visual. Everybody can understand that. What also is good about this, when it hits a certain point, you can say, okay, when it hits this point right over here, I'm going to do something. I'm going to spray, I'm going to square it, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that or whatever I'm going to do, but I'm going to do that at that point in time. Now, you may think that this is old school, and I'm a little bit of that nature. But the last time that I've had somebody from Libby Owens Ford in my class, the guy said this is exactly what they use. And this is exactly what a lot of people use as far as tracking. So it's very visual. The electricians can understand it. They can look at it and say, there they go, there they go, there they go, there they go. And they can see it. Okay? So they're using the shift instruction of the program controller. It's not a special instruction because I already showed it to you. It's a right shift through an array, and it goes down, and you can see it. Now, what's bad about this? Well, there are no yellow bits, there are no red bits. There are only bits, so you can only track one thing at a time. So if you have two different products, you have to have two arrays. Or you have to have an encoding of some kind in this array. You have these 5 bits, you have to encode something in those 5 bits to actually say this is. In the middle of those 5 bits, you have to do something. You have to turn a bit on or a bit off in order to make it so that it's either the yellow or the red. So if it's the third bit of these 5 is off, it's a yellow bit. If the third bit of these 5 is on, it's a red bit. Or it's a red. That's the way you can play that game. If you want to play the game, that's one way of doing it. Okay, that's one way of doing that. Not the best, but it's one way of doing it. Any questions about that? So you can track with this shift instruction, and when you hit a certain bit, you can turn on an application. You can turn something on, turn something off, and it works very, 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 very well. The thing that actually does the movement is like a sprocketed wheel. Every time the proximity switch is within range, this moves it that far. A sprocketed wheel or some kind of a turning mechanism will do that. When they get through the one word, they go to the next word, just keep going down, and you can see this, you can actually see these as they're going through, the parts it's going through. And it's very visual, and it works. It works. I do not want to minimize the fact that it works. Where's an application for this? A spray booth. You cannot put instruments in a spray booth to determine whether or not it's this size or this size. Why? Because the sensor will get sprayed over just as quickly as anything. You know, basically, anything with vision will get compromised in a hurry. You say, well, but I could use a proc switch. You might, but again, everything in there gets gunked up. So you basically want to sense it out here, track it, and then spray it, and then that's a tracking application. Also use barcode systems with tracking. So another application that I did was a long line of product. And in that line, we read a barcode. So you have your barcode reader right here. And you have tracking. And now this one goes to St. Louis. This one goes to Kalamazoo. This one goes to, you name it, Amarillo. Okay, got it? And it goes down to there, and a little thing hits it, and it goes off this way. It goes off this way. So the barcode, that one tracks, this one tracks. You track the leading edges, and away you go. Okay? That works. I did that application in 1980. Had 19 sidelines. Exactly the way they did it, the tracking was exactly that way. Any questions about tracking in that way? And I'm not against that approach. As you can tell, I've got another approach coming up here I want to talk to you about, but again, I don't want you to think that I'm against that approach because it's very visual. And that's tracked based on a movement. Here. Now here I get into other languages, and this is the language like C, which they call it sequential logic, and Alan Bradley has the same thing, and this is one of the 3 basic languages you can use. And you can see here, you can have all kinds of instructions with it, okay? Does this make a little bit more sense? If then else, for loops, that type of thing. It's a C-type sequential language, okay? All right, so that's the language that you could also use, and in that regard, here is how I did the tracking on a line. Okay, so you would bring in a part, and I had these represent 16 bits. This would be a 16-bit word. Another 16-bit word, 16-bit word, 16-bit word, 16-bit word. This is 8 bits, 8 bits. Okay, so here would be the part 1's pattern, the part 1's position. So there was 8 bits here, so you could have 256 positions down this conveyor. So as you incremented, this incremented. And then you would say at a certain point, is there an action at that point as you increment to that point? Is there an action with that piece at that point? And you would say if there was, you'd go up and see, now does this pattern have that action? So there would be another program that actually say, is there an action at that point? If there was with that pattern, you would do it. So basically, we did that, and this would be part number 1. Part number 2 I limit it to 5 parts per section of conveyor. I said there are going to be 5 parts on a conveyor. And by the way, this has worked very, 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 very well. I wrote it all in assembler, and it worked very, 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 very well. And I would not be at all ashamed of somebody using this approach as well to try to track parts. What's wrong with this approach? Electricians can't see it. What's good about this approach? Much more flexible. You can have 256 different patterns. You can have 256 different positions. And then you can have up to 5 parts on a section of conveyor at a time. That was the limiting factor. I was accurate to every 3/4 of an inch on every section of conveyor. Very accurate, very flexible. When I had a pattern, you could either have a long pattern or a short pattern. A long pattern could actually, you could break it into little patterns, little sub-patterns, and then there was, like a piece of glass would be going down the line, and then subsequently it was broken, and then those pieces could be tracked. That allowed that as well. Pretty sophisticated. Again, I don't want to brag about the way it was done. I copied most of this. The thing that I did that was different was I used a scanned program for the motion to move it as opposed to an interrupt-driven program, and I told you about the story about that, which was what? What was the story about that? Don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. 99% of the time, that is your better approach. Okay? Now, this chapter talks a little bit about some of these other languages, and it shows you some of them down here. I put them. Oh, and by the way, this example right here was done earlier with 2, but now if you did it with 4, would you follow the same logic, or would you flip it over to a FIFO? Good question. But if you did it with the exclusion of this one but not these other 3, the first one programmed, which would usually be this one right here, will always get the favor. In other words, if one goes empty, and then you're putting a new one up here, you're filling it, but let's say that 2 of these go empty. Let's say this one goes empty before this one. But this one's program is written before this one, so this one would always work. This would always be filled before this one. This would always be filled before this one, before this one. Everybody agree with that? If you wrote it as the way that I previously wrote it, the one that was written first in your logic would always get preferential treatment. If you do a FIFO, there's no preferential treatment. The one that was next, that went low, would be started next. So that would be, when you get to this point, you say, which is the better way to go? FIFOs are the better way to go. Okay. Again, not a biggie, but there it is. Okay, so now we come down at the last part of this chapter, and we talk about, just briefly, all these other languages, and look at the example that they gave in the Siemens, this thing right here. This is all the other languages, and the example is from the example that they stole from the people that wrote the book who stole it from me. So Siemens stole it from the Kaplan people who stole it from me. Anyway, that was they used the same percentages. If they had to use the same percentages, I couldn't have said anything, because they drew the conveyors differently. But they used the same example to show the different types of languages. So as you're going through and you're looking at this stuff, this is the way they do the languages. And I'm not trying to impress you, but this is why they do FBD, statement list, SCL. There's the SCL. Gives you some ideas as far as that's concerned. And then CEM, this is this other language called CEM. I don't think I even want to spend the time on CEM. There's so many languages that you can choose from that this newer language called CEM isn't worth the time to explain it. Now, if you get somebody that says they want this new language called CEM, I've heard about it, and that's as far as it goes. I'm not trying to impress you that I know it. I just looked at it and said, I don't think it's not worth my time. Maybe it's because I'm old, I don't know. I just struggle with that. But again, this is the other chapter. This is chapter 13. This is a good chapter because there's so much in it, but you know, after a while, you just kind of get lost in all the fog. Okay, now when they first brought out PLCs, they did not have matrices. They did not have arrays. Okay, and people kept clamoring for the ability to do this kind of work. Modicon was one of the first that did that. They had 3 instructions: table to register, register to table, and table to table. What does that mean? Table to register was you went from an array to a single word. So you selectively picked out of an array one word, and then you moved it over to a specific holding location outside of the table. Register to table was the opposite. You would take a word, 16-bit word, and put it into an array, stuff it selectively down an array at a specific location. Table to table would jam a whole table from here to there. Those are the 3 instructions. That's all they had. But it worked. Okay? And that basically is all you need. Table to register, register to table, and table to table. You can get by with just that. Now, how did they do this? Well, you had this big, long table of words, and you just, at some point in time, in some place, you just said, this is where I'm, out of this 2,000 words that I have allocated, I'm just going to pick out 200 words, and I've got a table that's 2,000 words long. Okay, I've got from word 1 or from word 0 up to word 2,000, and somewhere in there, I'm just going to pick out, and that's my array. Now, what's wrong with that? Somebody can write over that with greatest of ease. Okay. Somebody else can write over that array with their array, and you can't stop them. Matter of fact, I've seen it. All of a sudden, the whole thing just starts being filled up with a certain number. And you sit there and you watch it, and it kind of comes down, and all of a sudden you say, now stop at my array point. Stop at my point. Now, what do you have to save you? The table has, what do you do next? You do not save. You basically, your table of all your constants is wiped out. So what do? You go back and look and see what was it that did that, and you do not save. You stop your program. You shut it down, and then you reload. Because if you didn't reload, if you did a save now, all your data would be gone. So in other words, you have to protect your data that you have built up. Constants and all that kind of stuff, and they're all stuffed in this one big long table. So what is a better way of doing that? Well, declaring separate tables for different functions, okay? So I've got a table over here that does something. Over here, you got another table that does something. So you declare a table, or you declare a data block, or whatever you do, and in that you have these arrays. Or you can have each of these separate as arrays. But you do not want one big long table for that very reason. If you get it written over and then somebody does a save as, you're dead. Because unless you've saved an old copy, saving several old copies is worth your weight in gold, because if somebody does that and it overwrites everything, you got to go back and recreate all your data. It's a mess. So you very quickly learn, don't do save after something catastrophic. Do not do that. And also, try to historically go back and do a autopsy to try to find out what happened, because it can be catastrophic. So now we have things categorized and limited as to how they can get destroyed. We limit things to a certain array or a certain block of areas. But that old style was deadly, but it's what it was. Okay, so now we go back and we talk about the physical batching systems, and we have one with 3 ingredients and a scale. And by the way, these use scales. This is a scale system, and here are various scale systems that basically say, weigh this ingredient up to this point, then weigh this ingredient up to this point, then weigh this ingredient up to this point, and then stir them all up, and then present that as a final product. Now, there's 2 basic styles of this. One is this thing, and the other is this. The difference is what? When you elongate this and make this into a system that is really big, this gets really, really, really tall because this has to be under this. These systems can all be flat and they all go onto a belt. What is bad about this system? If you mess up, you got to start with a clean belt. Okay? And you also have to phase these in. This starts, then this starts, and this starts, and this starts. Does that make sense? Because you're going to dump this off at the end into some kind of a mixer. So you start with this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, and then as they're flowing down, they go off the end. So you've got the same amount of each one of them. Okay. Now, is this used a lot? Yes, they are. These systems are used a lot. These systems are used a lot. This is a small version of what you would find in a typical batch house, like with Owens Corning, Owens, Illinois. All the major batch house people do this kind of thing. But these are huge. This is like not a $50,000 gallon drum. This is a huge structure that goes maybe 100 feet tall. The batch house at Aiken, South Carolina for Owens Corning fiberglass is 165 foot tall. Neatest thing in the world. Take the elevator at the end of the day, go up to the top, especially in the fall when you see it's over a pine forest. You see all the people starting their fires at their homes after their day of work. There's a little fire over here, a little fire over here. They're out in the backwoods, enjoying life, doing whatever, and they got their little smokes, whatever, going up there. But you're 165 foot up in the air. End of the day, go up there and see what the world is like. Very interesting life. Climbing on top of motors up at 165 foot up in the air, if you're afraid of heights, is not pleasant. That said, I was afraid of heights until I joined Owens Corning Fiberglass. And the very first job that I had, went to Newark, Ohio, and they did not have an elevator. They had a bucket elevator it had like little flat steps out, and the thing went all the way to the top, and it was continually running, and you just jumped on. And when you get to the top, you better jump off or it'll go over the top. And not a pleasant thought, but you just learn to jump on, jump off. Another sight that I probably I never saw, but I can only imagine. So you're carrying prints, right? And you're going up the outside on 165 foot up. Now it doesn't all go at once because you go ways to a landing, and you go to ways to a landing, ways, and you go back and forth. But you'd crawl on, you go up, and there's a thing around you, a cage around you. So if you fell, you would be caught, right? In the old days, they did not have the cage around you. You were basically out in the open. And get this picture. One of the best guys for this one company who actually did that was one-armed. Now, how do you carry prints under your arm and go up one-armed? I don't know. But they did. They had a guy that was. You have to be quick. Anyway, I don't want to discourage you, but some of these images that I have is just, that one is something. Anyway, how do you do this? How do you do this in the program? Well, you have recipes, okay? And each recipe has steps, and each step has multiple words of actions that you do. Now, what's the end result is, and each step is executed one step at a time, and then at the end, you report what you did. Why do you have to report what you did? Why do you have to report exactly what weighed each part of it? Isn't so important with the fiberglass that you blow into walls, but the fiberglass that you put into a boat or into a fiberglass pole vault or something like that, you want to know what the glass structure was that went into it, okay? So you want to know what went into it, and they're very picky about that. The consistency of the glass had to be very precise. So you have to report exactly what you have. The worst reporting example that I have, and I have some good examples of reporting, but this one is an example from the up in Dundee. Anybody ever been to Cabela's at Dundee? Cabela's? Maybe? Anybody been to Ann Arbor? Yes? Nobody's admitting anything today. Ann Arbor is north. It's up 23, and you go through Dundee to get there. Well, just after you go through Dundee, if you look to your right, there is a plant that is mothballed. I don't know if they could still make cement there or not, but they mothballed it in 2013, I think, because of environmental issues. Okay? But up until that time, they made cement there. Okay? They made the stuff that you put in the ground, which is called concrete. Cement is the basic ingredient for concrete. That's how you make concrete, is you mix cement, okay? So they dug this stuff up, shale, out of the ground. They put it in a kiln, K-I-L-N, and they rotate the kiln, and it's at 2,300 degrees, and you're forcing this hot air through this kiln, and as the shale is working its way down and the heat is working its way up, there's a whatever it's called, and it's a chemical reaction of some kind. And the stuff that comes out the bottom is called clinker. Clinker is the base for cement. So they grind clinker up and make cement out of clinker. Anybody know that's how you made cement? Anyway, so somebody got the great idea that we will not only burn shale rock in this facility, we will also burn hazardous waste. Why? Because there's a lot of money in it. You can take hazardous waste from hospitals, needles, syringes, anything with blood, and melt it at 2,300 degrees and it'll go up the stack. And you can also melt rubber tires. What's wrong with this? You became an EPA site, whatever that means, but they become your best friend. And the EPA has the ability to come in and drop the needle any 30-minute period back since you started your process. You have to be able to show the running that you've collected all the instruments, and the instruments say that nothing dangerous went out the stack. So what this means is you have to have a very complicated data gathering system of your instruments in the stack. So they did that for a number of years, and I don't know exactly, I haven't talked to anybody recently about this, but in the 90s they did that, and I think probably until they quit, they did that. Now, if you did not comply, what would be the result? The EPA could put the plant manager in jail. Plant managers do not want to go to jail, so they are very meticulous in how they did that. That's the worst case that I ever knew about of systems that actually did collect data and then put that data into some kind of a format that they could regurgitate it on a dime, okay? But that was the worst case. I do not know of any other cases that stringent, but like I said, there's a 22-foot tall printout of a program from an engine plant. I believe that. I also believe what the guy told me about. I saw it. I saw these guys doing this. I worked there for part of one summer. I saw them doing this kind of collection of data on a very, very sophisticated system that did nothing but collect all that data. And it was very expensive. And people that did it got a lot of money. Anyway, okay, so what do you call all this stuff? Well, you call these steps. That's the common definition of it, and you call it a step. Now, you can move a word or you can move a block. Many times I just use it we would call it a working word, a working table, when you moved it out of the array, you would call it the active step. Okay, so the first step would be step number one. You would move it out of your array into what we would call an active step. Now these words would have what in them? Well, the weight that you want to attain, the weight that you want, which ingredient? So the weight, the ingredient, and any other activities you wanted to do with it. Like at the end, we want to heat it up at this step, at the end of this step, we want to heat it up to 500 degrees. Or we want to stir for 5 minutes, or we want to do this, we want to do that. We want to heat and stir, whatever those bits would be, but we would want to do all that stuff to convey all that information in these words, in that array, okay? Then we go to the second step, then the third step, then the fourth step. So you build a program that works off of this, but really just increments you through the array. That's how batching systems have worked for years, for eons. Now, you can get more complicated than that, and I'm going to show you one that really is very complicated. Here, I'm going to show you one, and I purposely misrepresent things because I don't want you to say, but he told us that it was just like the one at, yeah, it is. This one is like the one in Aiken, South Carolina for the main mix batching of the wet ingredients. Okay? Now, what is this about? Okay, we can have 3 main mix tanks. In other words, instead of 1 main mix tank for whatever you're mixing, here there's 3. Okay? Now, any main mix tank can, at any point, add any of these ingredients. And they've got scales on these, so there'll be scales down here. You can also add premixes. So you can grab one of the premixes. So you can have a premix going while you're adding a main mix. You follow me? You can be doing them simultaneously. Now it gets a little bit more complicated, doesn't it? It's not just a step by step by step. It's you can set this in motion while you're setting this motion, and you can any premix can grab any main mix can grab any premix. Oh, and by the way, you can grab more than one at a time. You can grab 2 or 3 if you want to. Does anybody start to get the feeling that, oh my goodness, this is not as easy as it looked? It isn't. It's very doable. Okay? And they've been doing this. This was done in 80, 81. So this has been done 40 some odd years. I don't know what they do anymore, but that's what they did back then, and I'm sure that's basically the same. It was that way when I left, and I'm sure it's pretty much the same today. So you say, that's a wet ingredient? Yes, those are wet ingredients. Those are all liquids. You can have dries, you can have wets, you can have combinations. Okay, so I want to go back and I want to talk about the look and feel of a batching system, because this gets you a little bit more invested in it, okay? Okay, so here's your scale weighing block. If you want to, from Siemens, Allen Bradley's got one very much similar to that. They're not cheap, so they attach to the processor itself, and these are about $1,000. This guy over here is about $200, $300. This is about $1,000. Why is it so expensive? Because weigh cells are complicated devices. They're very complicated devices. What is this? This is a load cell. Load cells are not cheap. Because load cells cost you between $500 and $1,000. So that's the load cell. Load cells have to be suspended underneath the weigh vessel, and you cannot have a lot of other things attached to the weigh vessel. In other words, you cannot have things attached to it that will, like a thumb on the scale with a grocery store, you cannot do that. Now, can you weigh accurately? You can weigh very accurately with these. 1 part in 10,000 is not out of the question. You can weigh very accurately. Typically, there's one under a load cell under each of the 4 corners. And here's another type of load cell. Believe it or not, you can weigh on the move. It's not as accurate, but you can do that. You can weigh this. What you're weighing is you're weighing the belt and the product on the belt. One of the most fun parts of my job when I was at Owens Corning was I got into this stuff a lot. I did a lot of this. And this is there's a lot to weighing, okay? Now here would be a weigh system with a little bit bigger than the other one. This is where the load cells are. There's the load cells. There's 4 of them. And this would be like a vessel that you would have that you would be weighing. So you put something into this, and then maybe you would be putting 3 or 4 ingredients in this, and maybe you would have a heat in there. Maybe you'd have a mixer in there or something like that. It would mix this up, and then it would dump it out. There's another one. Here is a cheap load cell converter. So you bring the load cells in, then you read it out here, and then this has an analog value that's an output. What's cheap about this? Well, it only updates once every 3/10 of a second. So you're telling me, Ted, that I can only be accurate to the way that goes in to that vessel to 1/3 of a second? In other words, if 10 pounds is going in a second, I can only be accurate to 3.3 pounds? No, you can be more accurate than that. Why is this only updating every 3/10 of a second? Typical waste systems only update every 7/10 of a second or every 10/10 of a second. Oh, why could this other system up here, that Siemens system, be so much more accurate? Well, you pay for that. And they can be more accurate because they do most of this in mathematics that I'm going to describe to you right now, which is what? Have you taken a course in linear interpolation? Does that ring a bell? Interpolation, what does that mean? You collect the data, collect the data, collect the data, collect the data, and you look at when it moves, and when it moves, you collect the data again. You look at this time frame, and you basically predict. Can you be more accurate than from here to here? Yes, you can. You can actually turn it off right in the middle. Okay? So it only changes at this point, this point, this point, this point, this point, but you can linearly interpolate and actually predict when it does that. Now that is being done for you in that Siemens system. And I think most of the other systems that are today, the more sophisticated ones, they actually do that inside. But if you only buy the cheap version, the one that would be Red Lion, you have to do this yourself. We say, that's beyond me. I can't do that. I'm looking at people who can do that. What do you do? What do you do? You say, when did it change? Did it change by more than X? If it did, when did it change? You mark the time. You mark the time here. When did it change again? Mark the time here. Okay, this is the X direction is time. The Y direction is weight. So you get how much it's being added to it per unit of time, and you can predict pretty much that rate of increase. So you can actually predict. Okay. Any questions about that? You can do that. Linear interpolation. Have I ever? You think, well, he's talking about stuff that he's never done. I've done this. Actually, had to do this in order to get an accurate system with a not too accurate scale system. You do this, or you buy the really fancy ones that are accurate to 1 part in 1/10,000 with an accuracy of a millisecond. You can either buy it with the accuracy. It's the time that's the increment that's the part. If you want to get it really accurate, you can get it, but it's the time, how accurate to how quickly does it respond? That's the key. How quickly does it give you that information back? Here is ANSI ISA 88, which used to be called SP 88, but it's 88. Batching control. I just copied a couple pages, and I really shouldn't have copied, but I used quotes around where I copied from the ISA, International Society of Automation's website on SP 88. Okay? So this is their dumping of basically old batch house people's best practices and things that they knew. Very smart people. Okay? Very, very, very smart people. They dumped core, they dumped memory, they dumped everything they knew, and they put it in this specification. And here it is. You say, well, you copied it for us, that's all we got to do. No, you should go back and look at it, because I only copied a couple pages. Here's some of the specification. The modes. What are the modes of a batching system? I cannot even begin to tell you all the modes. These people nailed it. Okay? So if you get a job where you're the person who's supposed to be in charge of the batch house or the batching system, what do? You go to the person who is actually going to run the process and say, now, how many of these modes do you actually need? They check them off. And then the other question is, have you used these before? Do you really use this? If they say no, then you scratch it out and don't you do it. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work to provide all those modes. What is this other stuff? What is that? Looks like a state diagram to me. So they describe state diagrams of how the states should proceed in a typical batching step. They actually do that. Does that make sense? It's exactly what they're doing. They're drawing state diagrams to show you how they do how to proceed through the steps of a batching system. And they have a potload of these. I just put a couple in. And reporting, what do you report? Oh, you'll have fun. If you get into batching systems, you will have fun. There's a lot here. And I guarantee you what these guys have done is nailed it. So you can go back to your SP, you can say, now what was that again? It was ISA, Instrument Society of America, International Society of Automation, SP 88. 88 is the typical, is the good number. Say, I'm going to dial that up, look at SP 88, ask them everything in that, and they'll get so tired of you asking question after question after question. You'll get tired of that after a while. But on the other hand, there will be nothing that will be left unturned. No stone will be left unturned if you go through the whole thing. And I'm not suggesting you do the whole thing. I'm just suggesting you look at it yourself and say, what's reasonable? What are these people doing? Are they doing all this, part of it? I guarantee you if they're doing something that you don't ask and you don't program, they'll nail you for it. So you should ask them up ahead. Are you doing this or are you doing that? Or what are you doing about manual adds? Do you have anything that you're going to manually add? How do you want to do that? What if it doesn't weigh? What if the weighment doesn't come up what you want? What's your tolerance? Do you want to add a little bit more by hand, and then hit accept, or do you want to just dump the badge? All good questions, all valid questions you have to ask. Any questions about that? Okay, now other types. No, I want to go back and I want to talk about how you increment through a recipe. And I want to talk about some of the old approaches to this because there are some really doozies, okay? I know I'm getting late, but there are some doozies of ways of doing this. And I want you to understand that as much as we can, we try to show you all the various ways that people have done stuff like this, okay? So, like I said, there was before, and this is a history lesson, I guess you would say, before the more modern computers that are on the factory floor, we had a company called Digital Equipment, okay, Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, Digital Equipment. And they were out of Maynard, Massachusetts. Okay? They made a product called the PDP-8 and then the PDP-11. Okay? They came up with a style of addressing that used the @ sign. Okay? And this is prominently, you've seen it a lot. But when you use the @ sign, basically you're saying that if you're embedding this in something, you would say it's, instead of what's in the brackets, use the number that's at this location. I would say like at X30, like at location X30. So anything that's in the brackets, let's say the number at X30 was 10. So everything in the brackets you would replace with the number 10. Okay, it's called indirect addressing. And what Allen Bradley did was they used this approach to basically allow people to do indirect addressing. Okay? So Allen Bradley then used indirect addressing for the purposes of being able to move through matrices. What's wrong with that indirect addressing? Why did they get rid of it? It is esoteric. And if you want to make somebody not be able to understand your code, use a lot of indirect addressing. Okay? So they used it in the PDP, or they used it in the SLCs used it. Some of the SLCs used it in the PDP5 and the PLC2s. No, they didn't. They used it in the PLC5s, and they used it in the PLC5s, and they used it some in the SLCs. So these used indirect addressing. Indirect. I can't say it. There it is, indirect addressing. So they used indirect addressing in those two PLCs, PLC5 and the SLC. They got rid of it when they went to the newer control processors, the control logics. They got rid of it. Indirect addressing was eliminated. And they also had another one in the lower level SLCs called index addressing. So index addressing and indirect addressing were both eliminated in the Control Logics platform. Why? They were esoteric, hard to understand. But as per usual, I want you to understand a little bit about them, especially index addressing, because we used to use it as a primary motive for teaching this next part. Okay? And again, why do I keep things past their due date? It's hard for me to take stuff out once I've got it in. So here is the MIME program. And I give it to you, but I give it to you in indexed addressing. Okay? Now what does this mean? Well, basically it means this. I've got this program here, and I'm going to try to push it over to the side. If you want to use this program, you certainly can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But again, it's one of those that you can program, and you can actually learn a lot about addressing schemes. Okay, if you do, it's a good one to do things to do this with. Okay, I'm again not forcing you to do it. If I can get it over there. A little tired today. I'm sorry. I'm tired. I got up early. Yeah, I woke up like dumb, but I did. Anyway, so this has to do with. Can everybody see that over there? Can everybody see this? Again, I do not give you the comments, because if I did, it would make it too easy. But the very first one is a one-shot for the run. And those first two lines there, all you have to do is you have to make a bit and then the OSR. The way I would write it today would be the first rung is gone, second rung is here's my run, and then my seal circuit. And if you look at what I do, I basically am a one-shot happy guy. Everything I do it with a one-shot. So I'm going to say run, remembered. And then all these other things over here are things that can knock you out of run. Okay, so there's two of them. I didn't have to do a third one, but there's my coil. And these are things that can knock you out. That's it. So this would be rung number one. Rung number one. Rung number 0 is gone. So that's how you would write the first one. Okay? And then you go back and forth between showing and playing the You go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and that is this bit right here. So now I'm either showing or I'm playing. I'm showing them the bits, which one is on, or letting them play. And this part is that part right down here. Now, as I come down through here, you're going to see this S:24. Now that is the holding location for the index. Okay? If you were to write an array today and say, let's call it X, and it's say parend, let's call this N, that N is your index. That's how far down the array you are. Okay? So that is that piece right there. This is S:24 holds that word, holds that number. So if I clear S:24, what am I doing? I'm going back to the top of the array. That's all I'm doing. And where is this array set up? Well, you have to look over here, and it's set up, just an arbitrary place. I pick this location N70 through N715. So my array consists of words starting at N70, going through N714. That's where my array is at. But I don't declare it as an array. You never see that. Only thing you see is this incrementing down with a move instruction off of N70. So you're referencing this as your starting point, but then when you say move, this is a very moving project. This is a very moving program. Okay? If you see the move instruction with a pound sign in front of it, this is how esoteric this gets. Move with a pound sign in front of it. That's say move not from N710 or N70, but move from N70 with an offset that's enclosed in S:24. Everybody pick that up? That's it. If you see the pound sign says use offset in S:24. Period. Question is, how do you do that today, right? That's called index addressing. And that's still available if you dial up a PLC5 or a SLIC processor. If you walk into a plant and they still have them, and they do, this is what you'll be faced with, indexed or indirect addressing. Okay? I'm not going to go through indirect addressing because it's worse than this one. This was the lesser of the two evils. But this one is okay. Now, how do you do that today? You basically say, I have an array. Okay, you have an array. And let's call it X. You have a parenthesis, and you have a number in here. And you put brackets around it, and that's it. End of story. Now, there's a little bit of added adventure to this from Siemens' point of view. With Allen Bradley, you declare the array right as you're declaring a variable. I'm getting to the end of my time, but with Siemens, you have to add a data block. You say, can I use an array in that M table? And the answer is no. They do not let you use an array in the M table. You have to declare a data block, and then in that data block, create an array in the data block. inside data block, the DB, create a number of arrays. Can I create more than one array in a data block? Yes, you may. You can create as many as you want. Can I access as an OB1? Yes, you may. But you have to create a data block, then create the array in the data block, and then address it as a data block slash, and it's in here how to do that. Yep, all of that. So it's array, or it's a data block, array, and then the indexer, which is the way you would expect it. That's exactly the way you would hope it to be, and you can do that today. Both of them do the same thing, and they both have move, MOV blocks, which you're happy about. They have a mask move, you have all this stuff. Allen Bradley has a copy block, which I never use, but you can, all you're doing is moving a word or two at a time. Is all you're doing, and that's all you need. If anybody does this with this, I'm getting to the end of my time today. I want you to understand that I will help you if you get into this one and get stuck. If you want to do this one, it's a nice one. If you work at a company that has old Allen Bradley equipment, this would be excellent for you. If you're going to possibly go to a company that has old Allen Bradley SLCs or PLC5s, excellent project for you to do. You can knock it out in very quick order, except for the fact that you have to get your arrays declared correctly. And you also have to propagate the array with numbers. Now, how do you propagate the array with numbers? You just go and fill them in. Now, this one, my example, I only used 3, and I ask you to do 4. I could care less if you do 3 or 4 lights. 3 or 4 lights doesn't really matter to me. Do you have to wire them, or do you have to put them on the screen? It doesn't really matter there either. But I only use the last 3 bits in this example. I only use the last 3 bits of each word. I do not use the whole word. I use just the last 3 bits. And that bit determines the light, which light turns on. So this would go, red, yellow, green, whatever. But it just keeps going in that same pattern. You say, what about next time? Do they play the game with a different set? No, they repeat the same one. You just keep repeating the same one. This is not a randomized game. This is you play the same game, you play the same game, you play the same game. It's not like they really have the same, it's not the game exactly. It's our rendition of the game, which basically says you're playing the same game every time, because every batch is the same. But what does this game get you to do? It gets you to indexing through a matrix. It gets you to increment through the steps and be able to use that as a matrix. I've got another example here, which is a little bit different, which is a whack-a-mole. This is the same, only you only go through the array one time. But with this array, you have 2 variables. You have which one is going to come up. In other words, you have 4 holes for this poor groundhog to come up. You have 4 of them. You have a hammer. And then instead of a hammer, you just have your finger. You push the button. Okay, so the light turns on. You have a second to push the button or whatever. But then you have a variable of how long it goes before you hit the next one. And what you're doing is you're storing 2 pieces of information. You're storing a byte, or really just a little short. But then you're storing a number that is the time between when the one light turns on and when the next one turns on. So this is the time between when you do one and when you do the other. That's your preset time. Okay? And you just increment down that one as well. And again, is it the same way if you play the game 100 times? Is it the same game every time? Yes, it is. That's okay. We're not trying to make you whack-a-mole experts. We're trying to get you to be able to program batching applications, which basically do the same array every time. Now, are there other types of array applications? And the answer absolutely is yes. The thing with the Rubik's Cube is an array. If you were to program that application, what would you do? Well, the group that did it prior to the group that's doing it right now, they They looked at it as an algorithm. This is the Rubik's Cube solving. They just started it with straight code. And what did they do? They ran out of memory very quickly. They ran out of memory almost immediately. So what's the way to cure that? Make an algorithm with, okay, an algorithm with, okay, if you have certain conditions over here, you do certain things over here, and you just keep logging it, you keep programming these. In other words, if you are working with the white level, the top level, if there's a bit here that's turned, or if there's a bit here that's turned, or whatever, if this, then you do certain things over here. So you have an algorithm that, okay, if this bit is on, then I do this. If this bit is on, then I do this. Whatever. You follow me? I do rotate, 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 or whatever. But I do that based on the conditions over and that are present. And you just keep going down through that list of the first word, second word, third word, fourth, until you've exhausted them. Until you've got everything done, until you've got all the white pieces on top. That's how you do it. Or one way of doing it. It's a very efficient way to do it from the point of view of it's a very efficient way of solving that with minimum memory loss, memory usage. Can't talk today. Whatever. Well, I appreciate your time. Anybody have any questions? I probably will think about half a dozen things to say after we walk out the door, but at least hopefully you have some ideas about some of the ways of programming various applications with this today. Take care. Have a good one. If anybody wants another one out of this one, is this one empty? If this one's not empty, you certainly can finish this one off. Anybody wants another one, please. I do not want to take these home. I'm asking, please, help yourself. You're very kind, but you should help yourself. Take another one, please.